Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Howdy, folks.
I am Dr. William J. Mayo.
And I am Dr. Charlie Mayo.
My brother and I appreciate your coming to Oakwood Cemetery today. We'd like to tell you a bit about ourselves, our love for this city and its people, and the medical center that makes Rochester known throughout the world. It's hard to know where to start.
Well, that nice lady, Miss Klepsettle, wrote a book about us. It tells our whole story, but it's 822 pages long, and I don't think they want to stay around for that.
I agree. Charlie, this year is the 150th anniversary of the city of Rochester. I suggest we talk about the early days, when we were growing up, the people and events that shaped us. In many respects, Mayo Clinic is the result of those early influences.
Well, I suppose we should start with our parents. I always said the biggest thing that Will and I did was to pick the mother and father we had.
Our parents were true pioneers. Our father, Dr. William Worrell Mayo, was born near Manchester, England in 1819. His family was too poor to send him to school, so he studied with a great scientist named John Dalton.
Father always talked about Dalton. He inspired us with his love of science, and in turn we made education and taking care of people and medical research core values of Mayo Clinic.
Father came to this country to find a better life for himself. He worked his way west and earned 2 medical degrees at a time when most doctors had no formal education at all. When he was living in Indiana, he married our mother, Louise. They moved to Minnesota 150 years ago in 1854. Father moved here to recover from malaria. He didn't know it then, but he was blazing a trail for more than 6 million people who have traveled to Rochester over the years for their health.
My mother was a strong woman. It was hard to earn a living back then, and she ran her own millinery business. And even though she never had any formal education, she was quite a doctor in her own right. She took care of lots of people, whether it was with Father, with other doctors, or on her own.
A lot of people ask, why is Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota? It's because of 2 people, but neither one of them was a doctor.
That's right. One of them is President Abraham Lincoln, and the other was our mother, Louise Mayo. During the Civil War, President Lincoln appointed Father an examining surgeon for the Union Army. Mother said that she didn't want to move anymore, so she decided to stay right here and have a stable place in which to raise her family.
We knew our share of sorrow. Father and Mother had 6 children, but only 3 of us, Charlie and I and our sister Gertrude, survived to adulthood. But our home was filled with love of people and love of learning.
Well, I saw, and you saw, Mother and Father make many sacrifices throughout our lives. And that probably helped to inspire the humanitarian ethic of the Mayo Clinic today. I remember that one time when Father wanted to buy a microscope and show us the hidden world that microscopes could reveal, but the cost was $600, which was an enormous amount of money back then, and we didn't have that kind of money. Mother and Father talked it over, and they decided to take out a mortgage on our house in order to buy that microscope. Well, that was a lesson in generosity and commitment that Will and I never forgot.
We came along in medicine like farm boys on a farm. We went with Father on long buggy rides out in the country to see his patients. The 3 of us would talk about medicine for hours and other topics, history, literature, and more.
Well, as you remember, there was no hospital back then, so Father had to do the surgery at the farms of his patients. We were his helpers, doing things like providing the anesthetic. I remember being about 4 years old and having to stand on a box so I could look over the operating table. Back then, the operating table a lot of times was a door taken off its hinges or the kitchen table. I used to have the needles and the sutures in the lapel of my coat so Father could reach them more easily.
By the time he was 7, Charlie here had memorized the name of every bone in the human body. And you know how Mayo Clinic has always loved the latest technology. I say it began with my brother. Charlie was a natural mechanic. When he was 14, he hooked up the first telephone in our part of the state. It connected Father's office with our farmhouse out in the country. And patients loved that newfangled way to communicate.
We had lots of fun back then. Will and I were virtually inseparable. We were known as the Mayo Boys around town. Anyone that messed with one of us would have to contend with the other as well.
Another lasting lesson we received from our parents was tolerance. There was a great deal of religious animosity in town when we were growing up.
That's true, and Father was raised Protestant, but he had a great deal of respect for the sisters at St. Francis. And the tornado hit in 1883, Father and the sisters worked together to care for the injured people. Well, that partnership eventually became St. Mary's Hospital, but that's getting a little ahead of the story, isn't it?
I think you folks know the rest of the story. Charlie and I graduated from medical school. We worked with Father and took on more partners.
We both had wonderful marriages. Will married Hattie Damon, who was a childhood friend and a brilliant artist. I married Edith Graham. She was the first professionally educated nurse in Rochester, and she was also a founding staff member at St. Mary's Hospital. As our families grew, so did the clinic.
Charlie and I worked so well together because we balanced each other. I was older by 4 years and more of the executive. Charlie here was the easygoing, informal type. Our professional skills balanced as well. I was a gastric surgeon. Charlie specialized in operations of the head and neck.
You remember that one time, Will, when that obnoxious fellow burst into your office and pounded on your desk? I want to see the head doctor. Bring me the head doctor.
Indeed I do. I glanced up from the journal I was reading and said quite briefly, "That's my brother Charlie you want. He's the head doctor. I'm the belly doctor."
We traveled around the world, and that was back in the days when travel meant either a railroad or a steamship. We were both presidents of the American Medical Association, and we were both honored for our work with the Surgeon General during the First World War. Whenever we spoke in public, we always used phrases like "my brother and I" or "our father taught us," and that helped to instill the ethic of teamwork that still can be found at the Mayo Clinic.
We remained close friends even as adults. All our lives, Charlie and I kept all of our money in a joint account at the bank. For many years, we lived in neighboring houses here in town. We wanted to build a library that would connect our two houses.
Well, our wife said no to that idea, but what we did do was to construct a speaking tube between our houses, and so if we'd want to have a meeting, we could just use that. I guess you'd call that instant messaging from 100 years ago.
The most important lesson that our parents taught us was the give-back philosophy. Father often said that what matters most in life is not what we can accomplish alone, but what each can do to contribute his or her share of social responsibility.
And in 1894, when Will was 33 and I was 29, we started taking money out each month and putting it into a special fund, which was used for medical education and research. By the time we were in our 50s, that fund had grown substantially.
In 1919, 85 years ago this fall, Charlie and I, along with our spouses, gave the assets of our private medical practice and the majority of our personal savings to endow what today is the Mayo Foundation. It's been called a private trust for public purposes. And generations of patients and staff, alumni, and many other friends have continued this heritage of generosity, which is one reason why Mayo Clinic is so strong today.
Well, Mother and Father started the tradition of love of discovery and learning and caring for people. Will and I carried that forward, and today it's imbued in all of the people at the Mayo Clinic. I guess it's fitting that because Will and I were so close all of our lives, that we died within 2 months of each other in the summer of 1939.
If you go to the Plummer Building at the Mayo Clinic today, you can see the Board of Governors room filled with diplomas that we received from universities all over the world. But what touches Charlie and me the most isn't a certificate. It's a comment from a friend who knew us both well. He said, "Your greatest success wasn't as surgeons, it was as brothers. There's never been anything like it." Thank you very much for coming today.